There you go. He's a good kid. I don't know how he came about that. And now this thing's going to load up everything that I've ever had loaded in the world. Okay, we're going to try this again. Well, it did something with PowerPoint.
You try mine.
Hey, looky there, man. Things are happening.
Just open up.
Woo, there's my calendar. Well, that'll come in handy. Let's do everything that he doesn't want to do. Show him what a good computer we are.
Use it.
Yep. Boy, I bought a new album from that bunch of yahoos on Praise and Faith. Man, it's beautiful, though, you know, absolutely beautiful. We're going to do it real slow. There we go. Yay! Oh, you know, I probably am due for a new laptop. I mean, I really am. I'm pushing. I don't even know how you know. Really? Well, I'm not going to pick it up.
If you'll hit the Apple thing, you know.
About this Mac. You say it on there somewhere?
Should say it. Well, yeah,
I don't know, man. More info. Hey, you know what? I better start class.
Yeah. Well,
there you go. Man, that's rough right there now. Slideshow. Here we go. There you go. Well, it looks pretty good, don't it? All right. We have been over all this tonight. We're just going to try to do a little bit of a review. Guys, we probably could do a little bit better when it comes to our overall maps. Italy's not on here, but come on, the boot, right? The boot is Rome. You know, it's an important thing. Probably ought to know that. Greece, you got Peloponnesia here. Corinth will be here. Spartans down here. Athens up there. Turkey, Mediterranean, Crete, Rhodes. I mean, these are just things that you're going to read about this. I mean, in the Bible, you're looking at this. You're just having an overall idea of where these big bodies are is a helpful thing. We talked about Mount Ararat. Remember, in the our overall scheme, we're looking at about 2,200 miles east to west and about 900 miles north to south. That's what we call the Bible lands. Also, it'll help you with history and things, although a lot of people aren't too interested in history. We talked about the Fertile Crescent. If you were alive and needed, drank and ate and stuff, that's where you lived. You didn't live in the Syrian desert or the Arabian desert. These were huge kingdoms over here, and so whenever they'd want to go to war with Egypt, which had a lot of stuff, you know, that they would like to have, they would have to come through the freeway here, if you will. Tyre, the Phoenicians, remember they kind of started the ones that kind of started giving us our alphabet. They will actually come over here to over here in Africa, and they will build Carthage, and that's Hannibal. And you remember they become a thorn in Rome's flesh, and Hannibal just about, you know, whooped them. But here we just overall, you got Egypt, Mediterranean Sea, the Nile River Valley. Remember, what are the two things that are interesting about the Nile? Yes, it flows north-south, and so the upper Nile is actually lower. So lower Egypt, upper Egypt. See how it, you know, we would say that that's lower, you know, doing north-south, but of course because of the river. Goshen, that's where the children of Israel hung out. You have the Pelsiac. That is in Goshen. You have waterways that kind of spread out, and the reason those are significant, the Canopic. That right by Canopic is where Alexandria is going to be. And Alexandria is going to be something you read about all the time. You're going to look at In your Bible, you're going to have the Roman numerals LXX, which stand for 70, for the Septuagint. That's where it was translated. So it is just a really good thing to know. Of course, Memphis there is the capital of Egypt for a long time. And remember, it meant the good land, unlike the one in Tennessee. Anyway, you've got, that's where it's near Cairo, where Cairo is today. Remember, Ramesses was the capital city in Goshen. And it was built by the slaves and believed to probably be the Hebrew slaves. We move over Alexandria. Remember, that's over there by the Canopic Mouth Bay there. Acts 18:24, there was a certain Jew named Apollos, born at Alexandria. He was a schoolman, if you will, like being born in Boston. I don't know if you know it or not. This is free. You won't have to, this doesn't come out of your tuition. But Boston is the #1 college town in the United States as far as number of universities in a particular place. That's why it is so messed up. But anyway, they had a good band, though. That's where Apollos is from, and of course he was a very eloquent man. You've got the Red Sea. Now remember, with this Red Sea, these antennas, up here is your two, what we call the canopic, and I can't remember the name of it, pulsic right there. But now these antennas that stick up, this is the Red Sea down here. This is the Gulf of Aqaba, and this is the Gulf of Suez. And Suez is going to have a canal that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. That's important. That's even in world history, you're going to see that a lot. Sinai Peninsula, what's interesting about Sinai? What's significant when it comes to the Bible? What's that, huh? Ten Commandments, that's right, law was given. You said something. Yeah, oh yeah, all in that wilderness. Oh, yeah, we'll talk about that here in a minute, man. They stayed all over this place. And you can see that, and believe it or not, if you get on Google Maps right now, if you got on Google Maps, and which would upset me because we're in the middle of class, but it'd be okay. But if you kind of blew it up, man, there's actually people that live in these little low-lying areas, but notice the high stuff. The high stuff's dry. It's desert. One of the things that they told us I remember when I was in the Guard years ago, we were going to go train out in the desert, and they were taking us to California. And I thought, man, California, that's like an oasis. All I've ever seen is palm trees and people drinking those drinks out by the pool. Where's there a desert out there? Well, there is one. And guess what? It's up. It's up. And we kept driving up and driving up. When we first got there, I'll never forget, the pilot says, we are starting our approach to Ontario. And I thought, what a jerk, man. He's pulling our legs saying we're going into Ontario like we're going to Canada or something. And, of course, there's an Ontario, California, if you don't know. And that's where we flew into. But we just kept going up and kept going up. And that's Death Valley, all that. It's real high altitude. And so as far as living space goes, you know, there's still some green over there. There are places you could live, but most of this is high, most of it is dry, and most of it is just uninhabitable. So you can, you know, I was watching some of those Hamas guerrillas. They've released some, I guess we call them guerrillas. I don't know what you'd call them, terrorists. But they were doing their thing, crawling in holes, you know, going around and blowing. And I was just, look at the stuff they're fighting over. You know, it's just destroyed rubble. I mean, there's no, it's just terrible. I wish they'd quit killing each other over there. Anyway, got the Gulf of Suez. Now look at this thing. You talking about an important part of real estate. See what happened? They came up here to the Sinai, the Gulf, the Suez Gulf, and they just started digging a hole, if you will. It's been tried several times. Finally accomplished it. But look at this. On March 23rd, 2021, a container ship named Ever Given became lodged in the Suez Canal. You've seen the size of those, you know, those ships are huge. Each day the canal is closed, disrupts an estimated $9 billion worth of trade goods going through there if it was to close. 12% of all global trade uses Suez Canal, 30% of global container ship traffic each day, and an average of 52 ships pass through that canal every day. Got a picture here. I think it's next. And, you know, I couldn't believe that's not a good place for an aircraft carrier to be, is it? Especially when we know these shoulder-fired rockets and everything now. So you better believe when you've got a $200 trillion piece of equipment or whatever those nuclear carriers cost nowadays, they'll have some presence on the banks making sure that if they even use that anymore. But you can put one of those through it. It's amazing. The Gulf of Aqaba, we don't talk about it a whole lot because it don't really go anywhere. Now, sister, you were talking a while ago about Israel wandering. Man, look at all these places. Wilderness of Shur, wilderness of Etham, wilderness of Sin, wilderness of Paran, wilderness of Zin. Sin and Zin have always been a problem for me. But these are just areas where they went throughout that 40 years of roaming, and there's just nothing there. It's just really not much life whatsoever. You've got the Edom. Remember, that was Esau. That was the brother of Jacob. He was given this area, and that's one of the reasons God wouldn't let them fight them. That was their kin, so they went around it. You've got the Dead Sea, and you got this place called Petra. Petra, if you notice, is right there. It's right side here. You got Edom, you got the Arabah Valley, and this here is Petra. Now, the reason that Petra is significant is it's unreal, man. There was a thriving community in there. I watched a special on this, and I'm not real smart on things like that, but them folks had figured out how to pitch a pipe. They were running water from 7 miles away, and they had figured to pitch that pipe correctly, because if you pitched it too hard, it would gurgle and it'd get stopped up. But they had it where it would just drain enough to fill the oasis and the water gardens they had, and this is where they had it. Can you imagine that place being full of vegetation and water, and it's just amazing. But I spend a lot of time watching shows nobody else would ever care anything about, right? But you look at this and you're going like, how did they do that and make it all line up when they were done? You know, you're talking about, well, let's add another element to that. They didn't start down here. They couldn't figure out what these holes on the sides were. Now, what's the first thing you would think, Rick, these holes going up here? What's the first thing, being an old laborer yourself, what's the first thing you think that's probably? Scaffolding, first thing, right? Yeah, they put them, ran them some stuff across there, you know, and they scaffolded it. No, they have no idea what that is. But what they did is they climbed here, started over here, moved over, and believe it or not, started carving at the top. And the great thing about that is once you started knocking that stone out, well, guess what it was doing? It was piling up, so after a while, you had a great place to stand, you know, as you worked your way down. But now you think about the technology, the geometry. You think about the engineering that it would take to figure out how high this had to be and then make it all look the same when you got down here. This is what's called the treasury of Petra. And it's carved right in here. You know, you have to ride a mule or something in there. My mother-in-law actually went here. I don't believe I'll ever get to go. I just don't, except maybe on YouTube, you know, with somebody's GoPro. But look at the size of some of these rooms. It's very spatial. You know, I guess they needed that to hang up all the money. Canaan, that's a constant enemy of Israel throughout just about their entire existence. Now, this is where I want you to get your map out. Okay, and I'd like for you to know this, okay? At some point in time, you want to need to be able to do this from memory, okay? Of course, you've got your Mount Carmel up here. Be able to draw that little picture, if you will. Mount Carmel, and this curve it on out. You know, Philistia's over here, Edom, Moab, and Ammon. But now we're going to get to the 12 tribes. You have Reuben, Gad, and East Manasseh, or you can just call it half-tribe Manasseh, or whatever you want to call it, just Manasseh, because you know it's on the east side of the water there. This is Transjordanic. It's on the other side of the Jordan River. Okay, but Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh. Then, however it makes you happy, to me, I like to start at the Dead Sea, and this like here, what's that remind you of? Carla, what's this remind you of? Yeah, but what does it remind you of? Yeah. You think so? I'm blocking it? I'm sorry. To me, that kind of looks like a part of your body. What is that, like your appendix or something? And what gets me is as every map you get, it'll look a little bit different. But just remember, the top part of the Dead Sea over, that's going to be Benjamin. Right below it, you're going to have Jerusalem, which is just barely in the land allotment to Judah. Now, this is all in the book of Joshua. They cross over here at Jericho, then they go and they attack Ai, and then they start systematically, of course, this has already been taken over here, then they start systematically taking over this land. Down here in the middle of Judah, you've got Simeon. And so you got Benjamin, Judah, and Simeon, and these basically kind of almost evolve into just kind of like one group. We'll call that the southern kingdom later. Dan, remember we said they didn't really live here, did they? They weren't able to get rid of those Philistines as like they should have. Then above that you have Ephraim. Ephraim's the dominant tribe. That's why in the book of Hosea, he'll refer to the northern kingdom. Remember, the northern kingdom is going to be here, all this group, after the what we call the United Kingdom. Remember the United Kingdom? You've got Saul, David, Solomon, 120 years. Then the kingdom's going to divide. Benjamin up is going to be in the northern kingdom. Ephraim's the major tribe. You got the other part of Manasseh. Issachar, Zebulun, Asher, and Naphtali. Those, you're going to need to know that, okay? Asher's up here with the Phoenicians and Tyre. Manasseh goes all the way to Mount Carmel. This right here will be the confusing part. If you can get that, you're going to remember where Benjamin is. You're going to know that Simeon is basically just a part of Judah. But that right there is the only part that will probably give you a little bit of a hiccup. You master that, and that's not going to be a thing. It's not going to be a thing. And when you realize that Jesus was sent as a light to Asher and Naphtali, those poor old countries that were so far north, because that'd be the first place the bad guys would come through, right? Okay, here's just an expanded view of that. And notice you will always see differences in maps when it comes to Benjamin and some of the shapes, because the details are kind of not real crisp. They didn't have a, what is that you see in the land ever down in? It's got the big concrete thing with the star stamped in it. Y'all know what I'm talking about? You see them out in the woods, they're using that in surveyors. Yeah, I can't remember what the survey marker. And they say, who was it? Tennessee went up there and moved one, you know, so Georgia couldn't have none of the Tennessee River, and so they've been fighting about that for 150 years. But those things are pretty important, and they didn't have them then. And so that, you need to know that. Well, it's really, and that's one of the things that I thought we didn't spend enough time with on this book, and that's why we deviate a little bit. So let's know that. There's a blank map. That's probably something you're going to see again. I think you even have one. You're going to need to be able to fill that out from memory, all right? That's not huge. You'll have the map, and you'll have that memory recall. Now, this is where it gets a little bit more technical, okay? You got 6 cities that I'm going to ask you to memorize where they are, okay? And they're called the cities of refuge. If you killed somebody accidentally, that's where you would go. They were like prisons today, if you will. If it was an accident and you needed to go there, you had to get out of it, because under that law system, you had something called the next of kin, who was responsible to exercise punishment on the person who killed their kinfolk. Remember, that's used by Joab to get David to let Absalom come back home. Remember the old lady he sends in there to kind of talk about her 2 sons get killed and so forth? Okay, so let's start on the right-hand side. Can you remember grab or grub? And that'll give you your GRB, okay? Golan is the first one there. Ramoth. Do you remember somebody talking about Ramoth? It's in Gilead. What is significant about that statement? Where does that use in the Bible? You hear it over and over. Preachers use it all the time. A couple of kings are hanging out. You remember that? You've got Ahab and you got Jehoshaphat, and Ahab asked Jehoshaphat to do what? Go up with me to where? Ramoth Gilead. Because them guys over there whooped him and took it from him, and he wants it back. It's what we would call one of the cities of refuge. And then there at the bottom, you got Bezer. Don't talk about it a lot. Don't know much about that. But now on the other side, starting from the bottom, you've got Hebron. Now that's a very significant city. That's where Abraham was. That's where David will start out his rule. The next one you have is Shechem. And then the one you have up the top is Kadesh. Kadesh has always been interesting to me. Do you remember Bill Humble? You remember that video series he put out about 1 million years ago? And it was talking about Bible geography. You know, it was dealing with that. And one of the first things he does, he interviews an archaeologist who's doing a dig on Kadesh, and that's where I started learning about tales. See, people there, they get a good piece of land. They thought, let's build a city here. Somebody come by, wipe it out, you know. 20 years later, people come by and say, man, it's a good place to build a city here. So they'd build a city. Well, they do that over and over and over and over. And Kadesh is one of the most inhabited towns in all. Tell just a build-up place. And so I just remember that over and over. A place called Kadesh, very old, been inhabited a long time. And then you'll notice there's different places here. Boy, you probably could use that. Do you have those written down? Do you have the cities written down? Okay, let's go ahead and stick these scriptures with them, okay? Kadesh, Joshua chapter 20, verse 7. Joshua 20 at verse 7. This is going to be Golan. It's in Deuteronomy 4:43. Today it's called the Golan Heights. I bet you've heard of it. Which one, brother? 2, Deuteronomy 4:43. Then you've got Ramoth, which again is mentioned in Deuteronomy 4:43. And Bezer, Deuteronomy 4:43. So you got 3 right there. And we got over here, we already mentioned Kadesh. Shechem is Genesis 12:6 and 7. Mountains of Ephraim, city where the Lord appeared to Abram with the promise, to your descendants I will give this land. Pretty significant place. Then Hebron, Joshua chapter 20 verse 7, the southernmost of the 6 cities. Hebron was 20 miles south of Jerusalem, also known as Kirjath Arba, and the name is changed. But that is Joshua 20 at verse 7. That just to give you a point of reference, okay? Next we come to, this is during the period of the judges. You do not, if you have some other way of marking this so that you could have this information. You know, I probably should have ran this off. You got a list of judges a mile long. But Jephthah, remember what did Jephthah do? Judges chapter 10 through 12. Remember the oath he made? Probably not a good idea. That's a life lesson, isn't it? Jair, Judges 10. Shamgar, Judges 3. Elon. A lot of these guys are just mentioned by name. You don't read much, they do. But one fella, Gideon, boy, now we know a lot about Gideon. He had trouble with wet fleeces, didn't he? Dry fleeces. Then you've got Tola down here, Judges chapter 10. You can see these guys are from all over the place. God would raise up a judge who would deliver them. And this is just dropping down a little bit more, kind of moving the map down. And you can see that Samson, Judges 13 through 16, from here in Zorah. Ebzan, once again, just hardly mentioned it all. And then Othniel, not much is said about him either in Judges 3, but he's way down here. So you can see how dispersed those judges were, because depending on where the threat was coming from, right? All right. Oh, I'm sorry. Go back. 2 pages? Okay. You know what I'll do? I'll go ahead. I'll make y'all a copy of this right here, these 2 maps. I should have done that anyway. But these are just judges. Listen, unless you're studying the book of Judges, you're probably not going to reference this a whole lot. But I would know where Gideon, you're going to hear that a lot. That's going to come up, especially in Sunday school. Your kids, you're going to be teaching them about Gideon and smashing the lamps and licking the water like a dog and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Those are things that stick out in kids' heads, right? Samson, you're going to remember him because of all his woman problems. So I might know where they are, but, I mean, all the Bible's important, but things like Tola and Elon and Shamgar, you're just going to read them once. It don't have a lot to say. You know, Rick Owen has a sermon on something like that, talking about the fella that was in charge of keeping the oil. But you know what? You might not know him, but if you needed some oil, he'd be a good fella to get in touch with, wouldn't he? So yeah, each one of these guys was a great man and you know, good leader, but not much is said about him. And so as far as our overall Bible geography, I don't know that I spent a whole lot of time here, but I would know those 3 probably. Your heavy hitters, I guess I'd say. Here again, we're going to look at the hot spot. Man, of course, it ain't much cooler today, is it? This is the Assyrian kingdom, and Assyria had ruled the world beginning with Tiglath-Pileser. You can see that's about 850 years before the Christ. The kingdoms of Israel and Judah, they're going to split, you know, and that's, what would that be? 1 Kings chapter 11. It's when Solomon's heart gets led away. let's see, 1 Kings 12. 1 Kings 12 is where you're going to have this division. And it's pretty much going to stay like that. Remember, the first thing the king does is put up a golden calf in Dan and one down here in Bethel, covering the hot spots. You know, you don't need to leave to go down to Jerusalem. That's a long ways, right? But you stay here and worship these calves. And it said it caused Israel to sin, and they never had a righteous king. Israel never had one. Southern kingdom just had 4. Israel is going to be taken captive. Okay? They keep messing up. They're Baalites. God sends Elijah to the northern kingdom. God sends Elisha to the northern kingdom. They won't repent. They continue to worship Baal. They continue to have their high places. Boy, I tell you what, I was looking at Isaiah, I think it was 56 or 57 that died, and man, the things they were doing. They would go up to these high places and basically just have sex parties in the name of these false gods, and they would offer up their children in the ravines. It was talking about. It was just terrible, and that's just the situation of Israel. Well, God's going to wash His hands of them, if you will, and so Israel, Samaria. Samaria is the capital city of the northern kingdom, okay? And so they're going to be deported by the king of Assyria into this area here, around between the Habor to Gozan and Halah. And then there's another group of people that are brought in. That's how the Assyrians beat you down and kept you down. They take you somewhere where you didn't know anything. You wouldn't know how to get resources, probably couldn't speak the language. And so you pretty much did what they told you. Kind of like United States government. I'm sorry, wait a minute. Well, I can't be talking about that. But anyway, so they go over into this area here, unless you're a Mormon. And if you're a Mormon, the Lord said, go to work and build after the manner of barges. And so you build a whole bunch of barges. Came to pass that the brother of Jared did go to work, and he built these barges, and they were light upon the water, even like unto the lightness of a fowl upon the water. I bet that worked out real great crossing the Atlantic. But anyway, the Jaredite barges are driven by the winds to the promised land. By the way, that's somewhere in the East Coast, up around New York somewhere. And they get off in now Moroni. Remember, Moroni is an angel that spoke to Joseph Smith. And, oh my, just absolutely ridiculous. And you know how much archaeological evidence has been dug up about these great societies that came from Canaan to North America in the last 150 years? Zero. It'll never be found because it's all a lie. And what amazes me is how people, man, you can't get people to believe the truth for nothing, but they'll believe Spider-Man, Batman, and Aquaman, and Moroni, and jump right in. But I bet they don't even know it. You know, I wonder how many read it. You ever got into, I don't know if you want to waste your time with it, but go check out some of those Mormon people making secret videos in the tabernacles there, and watch what all goes on. Everything's real quiet and crisp, and people hand things through the drape to the person who's conducting this. I mean, it's some strange stuff, man. And when you think that you can be baptized for your dead relatives and, you know, get them into heaven, and it's just really amazing. But if you're into, what is that they call that? Genealogies? You want to talk to the Mormons some, because they keep the best records in the world. But why is that? Why do they have such good records? You can go back and look up your great-great-granddaddy. Yeah. Dead people? No kidding. Well, I know they're, listen, you know, you've got a steady flow of young people that have to give 2 years of their life to do their mission. If you ever watch Brigham Young football, it's terribly sad. Absolutely. And they only keep them in one spot 6 months before they move them. You know why? They're afraid somebody's going to get to them and tell them something. Nowadays, when they come up, I just ask them, you know, they're wearing their holy underwear. Because that immediately lets them know, I know all about your cult. You know, and 20
years ago, we had one on the edge. You know, they bring them in, they don't come in at the same time. You got one thin man, you got one comes in. And they change them out like that. There's the one that had just come in, that just only had right on the cusp. He was questioning with belief. He was out.
Oh, I bet. Retraining, I would imagine. That's right. Yeah, yeah. It most certainly is. And if you ever get a chance, you can look it up online. It's on the old South Pittsburgh, you know, if they've still got that website up, I don't know. There's a book out by Alexander Campbell, and it was a concise history of the Mormons. It's only about 80 pages. That's where I first learned about these arks. I'd never heard of them. And so I started reading. I just read that. I don't recommend you read the Book of Mormon. It is not. And it's one makes you want to cry. And they did land upon the shores of the Promised Land. You know where the Promised Land is? The United States of America. You bet you didn't know that, did you? I always thought. Yeah, sure enough. And that's in Ether 6:12. Yeah. Chapter 13 there, Ether speaks of a new Jerusalem to be built in America. Yeah, and that's straight out of their Bible now. I photocopied that, you know. Chapter 13, they break it down for you. Ether speaks of a new Jerusalem to be built in America by the seed of Joseph. I guess that's why he needed all them wives. I don't know. Absolutely amazing. If you ever want to read about absolute horrific treatment, read about Brigham Young. And try to read somebody that's not a member of the Lord's church doing the historicity of it. How he killed a whole wagon train of people, ordered it, and then said he didn't and blamed it on the next guy who actually ended up having to pay for the crime. Of course, you get out to Utah and you're like, man, I can't believe they built this place. It's amazing. Well, anyway, Israel's going to be resettled by foreigners. This is significant. 2 Kings chapter 17, 24 through 41. I would read that. I'm not going to ask you about it, but for your own benefit. Because that's the Lord telling us, that's the Bible telling us that from here, Babylon, Cutheth, this is where the folks come in that we're going to know in the New Testament as the Samaritans. Okay? Remember the lady at the well? She's a Samaritan. And see, they were not accepted. They wanted to be accepted by the Jews. Remember when they come and Ezra, Nehemiah, those guys are going to build the walls, and they want to jump in there with them and say, hey, we worship the same God you do. And say, look, you know, man, that's great and everything, but God has, you know, told us to do this. You can't be a part of this. And so they weren't too happy with that. And so you had this big-time race issue with it. By the way, brethren, that's the only time I can think of in the New Testament where race came up. And you can see how Jesus dealt with that. He's telling this woman they've had a good conversation. You know, she wants this living water because, man, that would save her a trip to the pond every day, the well there to get it. And he says, well, go call your husband. She says, well, I don't have a husband. He says, you're right. You know, he says, and the man you're living with now is not your husband. Neither. You've had 5 husbands. And so she's like, well, water's getting hot here. I need to get out of this. So she says, well, you know, our fathers say that you ought to worship in this mountain, Gerizim. Gerizim today still has one of the oldest outside of Jerusalem copies of the Old Testament. And you can go there, and if you ever go to Washington, D.C., the Museum of the Bible, they've got a whole room put off to the Samaritans. There's only like 250, 300 of them left. It's a very small group of folks. But she wants to pull the race card and say, well, our people say we worship here, you know. You Jews, you know, and remember what he tells her. And it's significant. It's in love. But he says, you don't know what you're doing. You know not what you worship. Because salvation is of the Jews. But then he tells me that's okay, because there's coming a time very shortly where it won't matter where you worship. God wants folks to worship him in spirit and in truth. So that's 2 Kings 17 is going to show that. One of the first things that happens is those people keep getting eaten up by lions and stuff. And so their wise men they tell the Assyrian king, look, everybody's dying, and we're pretty much sure it's because they're not worshiping the God of the people that lived there before correctly. And so remember, the king of Assyria will send a priest from the old time down there to coach them up. They were worshiping idols anyway, so I don't think it did them a whole lot of good. But that's the narrative anyway. Okay, so Israel is resettled by foreigners, and we'll know those folks as Samaritans in the New Testament. Now you've got the next heavy hitter coming up. It's going to be the Babylonians. Nabopolassar rebels against Assyria, and he eventually has a son who's going to come in and defeat and take Nineveh. Now Nineveh is the capital city of the Assyrians. And do you remember what prophet went to preach there? Not willingly, really. That's right. Remember we talked about Jonah. Remember Jonah was sailing to Spain. He's here, and God says, go to Nineveh, and he says, okay, and gets on a boat going to Spain. And, of course, the storm comes up, and he gets carried by fish, you know, to throw it up on the bank there. Then he goes in, and why does he not want Nineveh to repent? Well, and he knows, but what are those folks going to do to his people? Because if they repent, what's God going to do? That's right. He ain't going to smoke them. Not just yet. Well, you can probably see his motivation, but he had a job to do, didn't he? So Babylon is going to go up here, and they're going to throw down with Egypt. They're going to throw down with what's left of the Assyrians in this big battle at Carchemish and become the superpower of the ancient world. They were the United States, if you will, in that day and time. They had whooped everybody. So the Babylonian Empire was a huge thing, not as huge as the Medo-Persian Empire is going to be. The Medes don't last too long in that two-party deal there, I guess you could say, two kingdoms. The Persians end up taking that over. And if you were wanting to see a person descended from Persia, from the Persians, where would you go today to find them? Iran. That's exactly right. They're Persians. And they've been upset ever since they got whooped at Thermopylae. And they're still mad about it, you know. So here we are, what? How long? Good night. That's been, what, 3,000 years ago? Yeah. Y'all know what I'm talking about? The Spartans and the 300 and all that? Thermopylae. It is estimated that army might not have been 1 million men, but it was real close to it. The Persian king is saved up and gets over there to Greece, and guess what? You got to have a navy. And he's got, first of all, got beat up by a storm. Then he got beat up by the Greeks. And with no navy, he ended up walking home, leaving his army. Anyway, Nabopolassar's son, Nebuchadnezzar, he was the general in charge of his father's armies when they defeated everybody else, if you will, at Carchemish. He besieged and took Jerusalem in 606 B.C. His father died right in the middle of it, so he had to leave. You know why? When you're next on the throne and the throne comes vacant, you got to get back because there's a lot of people ready to jump on it, right? So he needed to go back and do that. We have the first deportation. These dates are significant. If you're off a couple of numbers, -2, +, it's okay. You will find a lot of deviation. Now, sometimes you'll find hundreds of years deviation, and that's not good. Okay. It's amazing what some of the people who have doubted the Bible, even, you know, it's just amazing. But these are close, okay? The first deportation is Daniel and the young princes, the creme de la creme. These are the first ones that Nebuchadnezzar takes back to Babylon. About 10 years later, you're going to have the major group go back. That's Ezekiel. There's going to be close to 45,000, 50,000 people that are deported. That's the one, he's by the river Kebar. He's sitting in Babylon. We even have that song, By the Rivers of Babylon. That's that group. They're taken there. And then the last of the group, remember King Zedekiah? He's the last of the kings. He's about 41 years old when his eyes are put out, having just watched his children slain before him. You know, war's just bad. There's some qualities about Nebuchadnezzar you can look back and think, well, that was probably he did some things. But you know, I don't know. I think Zedekiah had made a covenant with him. Should have kept it. But Zedekiah knew he had a lot of pressure. You know, if you read the book of Jeremiah, you can see it. Zedekiah has not got a unified group of princes and knights under him, if you will. Think of the feudal system of England when you're the king, and it's great. But you probably only have a praetorian, you know. You are really counting on all these other, for lack of better words, knights you know, who have their own little armies, and so you all come together and go do great things. And so he's being pulled. They're telling him to trust in Egypt. You've got so many different parties pulling on him. You can sympathize with the guy. You really can. But what should he have done? Put his hope, trust, and faith in God of heaven. Absolutely. He doesn't. And you remember, Ezekiel at one time takes all of his clothing, puts it in a bag, and he goes over to a wall, and he digs under that wall and goes out on the other side, and he's supposed to go back, and he tells them, the people in Babylon now, that's how the king's going to go out. He's going to go out just like that. He's going to be sneaking out. That's exactly what happened. And you see, the people didn't believe that Jerusalem was really going to be destroyed. Been there a couple years thinking, man, you know, it's only going to be a little while, and we're out of here. And God's like, no. I said 70 years. You're about 10, 12 into it. You're probably going to die here if you're old enough to read this book, right? You know, Daniel was up in his 90s probably. Probably didn't make the return trip home. He didn't make the roll. You would think that'd be a name that'd be pretty high up on it, don't you? So a lot of folks that go there, they die there. But that's Ezekiel's job. Zedekiah goes. Remember, he doesn't have his eyes. Then we have a fourth in this, you know, you read it. You tell me what you think, because that sure sounds like a fourth deportation to me. And so you've got these three, 609, Daniel, you got Ezekiel, then you got Zedekiah. And I guess maybe you could count this one with Zedekiah, I don't know, but in the 23rd year of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carried away captive of the Jews 745 persons. All the persons were 4,600. That's a pretty good, significant group of people. And I've read that in Rex Turner's book on that. Well, but anyway, you have returns. This helps you with premillennial doctrine, okay? Because Zerubbabel came back 538. Now look, it's going to be about a solid 80 years when Ezra the scribe comes back. Ezra is going to tell you about Zerubbabel's coming back in Ezra chapter 1. Then later on, chapter 8, he's going to tell you about when he went. And then the last one is Nehemiah is going to come back. And remember, he's got a job to do, and that is to rebuild the walls. Because now notice that difference. From 538, let's just say 540 to round it up and make the math a little better, to 440, about 100 years, they don't have a wall. They've really had to been yelled at by a whole lot of prophets just to start building the temple, right? And so the post-exilic prophets, we call them. And so that's going on. Notice the journey home. This is in Ezra 1:1. This is the first group. They go up through El Epo, I guess how you'd say that, down through Hamath, Damascus, and so forth. And here's the numbers. And, boy, this might be something that'd be good to hand to you, too. The number of people that returned with that first wave under the king Cyrus, who Isaiah writes as the servant of the Lord. He's called a servant. He's called my chosen. And under Zerubbabel's leadership, who's, by the way, is in the lineage of David, they rebuilt the temple, but only a 20-year struggle. The temple they built was halted, remember. So you got 50,000 going back initially. About, what is that? Ezra going to go in about, boy, I hate trying to go up and then go back down. 80 years. You've got the King Artaxerxes, and Ezra the scribe is going to go back, and then about 13 years later, 12, 13, you got a little small group under that same king, but this is Nehemiah, who's the king's cup builder. And so why is all that significant? Israel comes back. They are rebuilt. And so when you read about the things like the Valley of Dry Bones in Ezekiel, you'll hear John Hagee, he'll go on that for days, talking about how Israel's going to be brought back to, well, it was, you know, and it has been. And Jesus even lived there or walked around there when that group was there. And of course, the kingdom was taken away from them. Here is another good thing too, because in Nehemiah 3, he goes around, you remember at night, and he goes out around the entire city of Jerusalem. It's all broken down, so it had been a work just to get around it. Fountain Gate, Dung Gate, you know what they threw out there, I bet. You've got the Water Gate, Horse Gate, East Gate, Sheep Gate, Fish Gate. And you're like, well, it's a lot of gates. Well, it's a big city. And so you'll see where different families are in charge of making up each one of those goals. And that makes Nehemiah so much more interesting. They're actually going to put a wall around Jerusalem so it can survive. And then it's still got a rough road. Just read Daniel chapter 10 and 11 and all the terrible things that happened under Epiphanes. But anyway, I hope you've enjoyed it. You've got a lot of information, but you got 2 weeks to digest, okay? Won't meet next week, and so I will miss you, and I know you'll miss having an extra hour to go to sleep at night. That'd be great. But anyway, I appreciate your good attention. I'm a little bit late.
You're not going to be here next week either.
Yeah. Who's not going to be here?
We'll have all classes covered.
No, you're only at 9 o'clock.
Man.
I'm gonna get up.
You will hear the vacuum at 9 o'clock.
I hear you, man.